Okay, so we'll consider this part 2. This one should be pretty quick. So right now we have a volume that's just assigned kind of a white color. Volume cube. Let's go look at this. The volume. So we have a diffuse color here. But how do we get that light to pick up something else, right? So the example here would be the light coming through a stained glass window. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we need to do is create a piece of geometry that the light's going to pass through, and then that will pick up that color information and then make its way into the volume, right? So this was what we left off with. In fact, just in case you're playing along, I went back up into the light linking from where we left off and made sure everything was linked to the all the geometry and the volume. I wanted to see what it would look like all the way across. Okay, so let's minimize that. So the first thing we need to do is create a little piece of geometry that's in essence going to be our piece of glass, right? So let's go up and we'll go to our right view, and I'm just going to move this right up above that, and I'll scale. Right, so fits pretty closely, and it's just underneath the port of light. So that's going to work for what we want. And we need to put a material on it. So let's go to RenderMan. I'm going to right click and put a PXR surface on it. Now, where do we put the image? So if I go into, okay, let's see what I had here. My desktop, advanced render, source images. Went and found this from the interwebs. I'm going to use this as my texture map, right? Just did a quick Google for that. So where am I going to put that, right? To put this on that surface. So for a surface material, if you're going to do glass, the refraction gain and reflection gain are going to be the amount, right? And we also, I guess we turn the gain down for the diffuse. So it's going to be a piece of glass, but we need to give it a color. So we'll go ahead and click this, and we could use Maya's material. We could also use, the file node. We could use Pixar's. We'll go and find that image. And let's go back to the surface. Now, this part's very important. Underneath the glass setting, what we need to do, because we want the light to pass through this. So I didn't model this as a thick piece of glass. It's just thin, and we want to tell it to go ahead and be thin. It just has to do with efficiencies of how the rays will go through that piece of geometry, pick up the color, and just keep on kicking through there. Look at the documentation about thin as it relates to the render if you need to. So let's go back to camera. Hopefully I've done this all right. So this is what we had a second ago. All right, so definitely got darker. Hopefully you can see the color is starting to come through now. And we can certainly crank this up as far as the lighting. Go back to the portal. I don't know. Let's try 60. Did I have this on IPR? Let's turn that up. There we go. Getting a little more light in there. And let's go to the distant one. Let's turn that to 2 again. And just so we can see it quicker, I'm going to do a little render region here. Sorry, it's being a little sluggish with the screen capture going at the same time. All right, so let's do render again. We'll get this going through this quickly. Just because of how it's mapped on there, it's hard to see, but remember it was kind of a, excuse me, black boundary, and then it had that center glass that's in there. It's also breaking up the shaft of light right here because it's picking up some of the black parts of the image. They're not letting the light go through, right? So we're getting kind of a stained glass effect. Because the angle for the light is so broad, we're getting kind of a diffuse pattern through that. And we're going to turn this back up. What is that? 1, 2, 3. I think it's 50,000 is the default there. And let's make this tone that down a little bit, somewhere in there. So because we had the light with a broad angle on it, what we were seeing was kind of a diffuse set of rays. Now as it's coming through, because it's more razor sharp, it's kind of the default is something like 0.583 or something. You can see the light coming through. It's actually leaking a little bit right there at the edges. Of course that bugs me, so I'm going to have to fix that really quick. Let's go back up to perspective. And I'm just going to scale that just ever so slightly. Let's go back in. All right, so the light is being affected by the color in the glass, at least from the image, the color from the image that's pretending to be a piece of glass. You can see that our light now is just a circle because that's the shape of this kind of pseudo rose window texture that we're using. And we're getting a lot of color bounce into that scene, right? So while that goes for a second, let's recap what we've done here. It still bugs me, it's a little leak there. Put that down somewhat and see what we get. Fit into that window maybe a little bit better. All right, so again, this would be kind of colored glass, stained glass approach. We did have to play with the brightness because again, the light is getting absorbed and we're getting different color, not as much light coming through because it's getting blocked by that texture. We went back and messed with the angle. So with that at the default or close to the default, you can see that we get this straight approach. You can see the shaft of light coming through there. And we'll go back and do this one more time. It's going to be a little bit brighter now because I opened up the angle. In fact, that's way intense. It's like trying to kill the world. So now we're going to get a little more diffuse ray across that scene. Okay, so I did a quick pause there so I could do a little tweaking and just end this on kind of a nice IPR render. So I cranked up the portal light intensity. I turned down the distant light, which was just kind of on fire, right? It's just too heavy. It's that kind of shaft of light. I did leave the angle at 3, so it gets a little diffuse as it works its way down, but you can still see some of the breakup that's happening because of the texture, that shaft of light that's coming through there. There's some nice glow. I think I might set this up to do a larger render just to see how this works overnight. Again, lots of potential to how to use this. Just remember again that the color for our little piece of glass, we turned the refraction gain and reflection gain up to 0. We turned the gain down to nothing for the diffuse, and then all important, we turned on thin for this. It was very important to speed up our render and get the light to do what we wanted it to do. Okay, I think that's part 2. I'll figure out the next one in the morning.